Don't let this happen. Don't fall into the trap that destroys any remaining respect the avoidant has for you, and that simultaneously validates every dysfunctional belief their defensive system holds about relationships and about people who love them. Don't beg them to come back. Don't plead for another chance. Don't chase them after they've disrespected you repeatedly. Don't lower yourself to pursuing someone who has shown through their consistent patterns that they cannot or will not treat you with the basic respect and consistency that healthy relationship requires. The moment you beg an avoidant to return after they've repeatedly disrespected you, after they've established pattern of withdrawal and mistreatment, after they've shown you clearly through their actions that they cannot show up for you in ways you need, in that moment, you lose. And more devastatingly, they win in the most toxic way possible. They get confirmation that their defensive worldview is correct, that people who love them are weak and desperate, that they can treat people poorly without real consequences, that boundaries are negotiable, and that patience is exploitable, that they are indeed the more valuable party in the dynamic who can behave however they want and still be pursued and wanted and begged for. Your begging after repeated disrespect doesn't make them respect you or value you more. It makes them lose whatever respect they had for you, makes them view you with contempt disguised as pity, makes them confirm their belief that you're too weak to leave and too desperate to enforce boundaries, makes them certain they made right choice in distancing from you, because your begging proves you're exactly the needy, boundary-less person their defenses told them you were. And here's what makes this so insidious. Most avoidants are spoiled, are trained through repeated experiences where partners accept their patterns without real consequences, where people they've treated poorly continue to pursue them and beg for their return, where their hot and cold behavior is tolerated indefinitely by people who keep accepting breadcrumbs and keep hoping things will change despite zero evidence of change occurring. This spoiling creates avoidants who expect to be chased, who assume their patterns will be accommodated, who believe they can withdraw and return at will without consequence, because that's exactly what their relationship history has taught them is possible. The main reason most avoidant relationships fail isn't incompatibility, isn't bad timing, isn't that the other person wasn't right. Most avoidant relationships fail because the avoidant has been so spoiled by partners who accepted patterns without consequences that they've never been forced to develop capacity for healthy intimacy, have never faced real lasting consequences that would motivate addressing their wounds, have never experienced someone who loved them and still chose themselves by leaving and staying gone when treatment became unacceptable. How begging them to return after repeated disrespect confirms their worst beliefs about you and love. The avoidant person's defensive system is built on specific beliefs about relationships, about vulnerability, and about people who love them. When you beg them to return after they've repeatedly disrespected you, you provide perfect evidence that confirms these defensive beliefs, making the beliefs more entrenched and making them view you through lens of contempt rather than respect. Begging confirms their belief that you're weak and that people who need them are inherently inferior to them. The avoidance defensive system categorizes people into strong, independent, not needy, and weak, dependent, needy. Throughout the relationship, they might have been struggling with which category you fit in, might have seen your strength in some moments and interpreted other moments as weakness. But when you beg them to return after they've disrespected you repeatedly, you definitively place yourself in the weak category in their mind. Strong people in their defensive worldview don't beg. Strong people walk away when mistreated. Strong people have boundaries they enforce. Your begging proves to them that you're weak, that you need them more than you respect yourself, that you're inferior to them in the power dynamic because you're willing to debase yourself through begging while they maintain the power position of being the one who is begged for. This categorization as weak creates contempt that's nearly impossible to overcome. They cannot respect someone they've categorized as weak, cannot desire someone they view with contempt. Begging confirms their belief that love makes people pathetic and desperate, reinforcing their decision to avoid vulnerability and genuine love. The avoidant fears becoming what they perceive as pathetic and desperate, fears that if they allow themselves to love fully, they'll become the needy one, the weak one, the person who needs more than they're needed. Your begging provides perfect evidence that validates this fear. Look what love does to people. It makes them beg, makes them lose their dignity, makes them chase someone who's treating them poorly. Your behavior becomes an object lesson that confirms their deepest belief. Vulnerability in love is dangerous because it leads to this kind of degrading desperation. This confirmation makes them more defended, more committed to never allowing themselves to be in your position, more certain that their avoidance of vulnerability is correct strategy that protects them from becoming pathetic beggar that love apparently turns people into. Begging confirms their belief that boundaries are negotiable and that patience is an infinite resource they can exploit without consequence. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant tested your boundaries. They withdrew. They were inconsistent. They disrespected you in various ways. Each time they did this and you stayed, they learned that your boundaries were flexible. But when you beg them to return, you provide ultimate proof that you have no real boundaries at all. You're communicating that there's no level of disrespect that will make you actually leave permanently, that your declarations of what you need or what you won't tolerate are empty words without enforcement, that they can treat you however they want and you'll still want them back. This confirmation that boundaries are negotiable and that patience is exploitable makes them comfortable continuing their patterns because they know there are no real consequences. If you're begging them to return after everything they've done, why would they change anything? Your begging proves they can continue exactly as they have been. Begging confirms their belief that they are more valuable than you. In the dynamic, cementing power imbalance that makes healthy relationship impossible. The avoidant needs to believe they have more power, more value, more options than their partner to feel safe in relationship. This belief protects them from vulnerability of being the one who cares more or who has more to lose. When you beg, you confirm this belief definitively. The person who begs is the person with less power. The person who is begged for is the person with more value. Your begging cements in their mind that they were right about the power dynamic. They are the prize. You are the pursuer. They are valuable. You are desperate. They have options. You have only them. This confirmed power imbalance makes healthy reciprocal relationship impossible because healthy relationship requires relative equality of power and value, and your begging has established inequality that cannot be overcome. Begging confirms their belief that your love for them is proof of your poor judgment or low standards, rather than proof of their worthiness of love. The avoidant struggles with deep shame and often believes they're not worthy of genuine love. When someone loves them, they interpret it as evidence that person has poor judgment, doesn't see how flawed they are, or low standards, settles for an inadequate partner. Your begging reinforces this belief perfectly. You're begging for someone who treats you poorly. This must mean you have terrible judgment about what's good for you. Must mean your standards are so low, you'll accept mistreatment. Must mean your love for them isn't testament to their worth, but is testament to your inability to recognize your own worth and demand appropriate treatment. This belief allows them to dismiss your love as meaningless because it comes from someone they now view as having judgment, so poor they'd beg for someone who disrespects them. Begging confirms their belief that emotional dependency is disgusting weakness that they were right to avoid creating in themselves. The avoidant views emotional dependency with contempt and disgust. They see needing someone as ultimate weakness. Your begging appears to them as peak emotional dependency. You need them so much you'll beg for them despite their poor treatment. This disgusts them because dependency disgusts them. It confirms their belief that emotional dependency is a toxic state to be avoided at all costs, reinforces their commitment to never allowing themselves to need anyone the way you apparently need them. Your begging becomes example they reference internally about why they must never become emotionally dependent. Look what dependency does to people, how it destroys dignity, how it makes them pathetic. Your behavior reinforces their defensive structure rather than softening it. Begging confirms their belief that people who really love them don't value themselves and therefore aren't worth being with. This creates impossible catch-22. The avoidant wants to be loved, but believes that anyone who loves them must not value themselves. Because why would someone valuable love someone they believe is damaged? Your begging confirms this belief. You love them enough to beg for them. This proves you don't value yourself, because a person who valued themselves wouldn't beg for someone who treats them poorly. This confirmation creates self-fulfilling prophecy. They can't respect anyone who loves them, because loving them proves lack of self-respect, which means they're condemned to either be alone or be with people they don't respect. Your begging reinforces this toxic pattern rather than breaking it. Begging confirms their belief that leaving you was correct decision because your behavior proves you're exactly the needy, desperate person they needed distance from. Whatever doubts they might have had about distancing from you, whatever second guessing about whether they made a mistake, your begging eliminates. They think, I was right to create distance. Look at this desperate behavior. This confirms they were too needy, too dependent, too much. I made right choice. Your begging becomes retrospective justification for their patterns and their decision to withdraw. Instead of making them reconsider whether they made a mistake, it makes them certain they made correct choice, makes them comfortable with their decision, makes them feel their defensive instincts were accurate. You've handed them justification for their behavior instead of making them question it. Why most avoidants are spoiled by partners who accept patterns without consequences. The avoidant attachment style in most cases is reinforced and spoiled through repeated experiences in relationships where their patterns are accepted without real lasting consequences. Understanding how this spoiling occurs reveals why avoidants continue their patterns and why most avoidant relationships follow predictable failure pattern. Most avoidants are spoiled because partners consistently accept hot-cold behavior without enforcing consequences, teaching them this pattern is sustainable indefinitely. The typical pattern: avoidant goes hot, creates closeness and intimacy, then goes cold, withdraws and creates distance. Partner accepts this cycle, continues to be available when avoidant returns to hot phase. Cycle repeats. Each repetition teaches the avoidant that hot-cold behavior works. They can have closeness when they want it and distance when they need it, and partner will accept this arrangement indefinitely. They're never forced to choose between maintaining consistent presence or losing the relationship because partners accommodate the cycling. This accommodation spoils them by teaching that they don't need to develop consistency, don't need to maintain presence during discomfort, don't need to work on intimacy tolerance because hot-cold pattern is sustainable. They're spoiled into believing this is acceptable relationship dynamic because partners' continued acceptance proves it's acceptable. Most avoidants are spoiled because partners beg and pursue after withdrawals, confirming that withdrawal creates desirability rather than consequences. When avoidant withdraws and partner responds by pursuing, begging, trying harder to get their attention, the avoidant learns powerful lesson. Withdrawal makes me more desirable. Distance makes them want me more. Pulling away increases my value. This is ultimate spoiling because it perverts natural consequences. Natural consequence of withdrawal should be increasing distance and potential loss of relationship. But when partner pursues during withdrawal, the consequence is actually increased desirability and increased pursuit. This teaches avoidant that withdrawal is effective strategy for maintaining power and increasing their value, encouraging more withdrawal rather than less. They're spoiled into believing withdrawal is tool for managing relationship dynamics rather than recognizing it as destructive pattern that should cost them relationships. Most avoidants are spoiled because partners accept breadcrumbs and minimal effort as sufficient, never requiring actual consistent investment. The avoidant offers minimal communication, sporadic texts, vague plans, occasional engagement, and partner accepts this as sufficient to maintain relationship. Partner continues investing significant energy while accepting minimal return. This spoils the avoidant by teaching them that minimal effort is sufficient, that they don't need to match partner's investment, that breadcrumbs are acceptable currency in relationships. They never learn that relationships require mutual investment because partners continue accepting crumbs as if they're full meals. This spoiling allows them to have relationships without doing the work relationships require, without developing capacity for consistent presence, without learning reciprocity, because partners do all the work while accepting minimal contribution from them. Most avoidants are spoiled because partners take them back repeatedly, without requiring evidence of change, teaching that words without changed behavior are sufficient. After withdrawals or after creating problems, the avoidant returns with explanations or promises. I'll work on this. I recognize the pattern. Things will be different. And partners accept these words as sufficient to restore a relationship without requiring actual evidence of changed behavior. Each time this happens, the avoidant learns that verbal acknowledgement without behavioral change is sufficient, that they can maintain patterns as long as they periodically acknowledge them verbally. This spoils them into believing change isn't actually required. Only acknowledgement of need for change is required, while actual change is optional because partners will accept words as substitute for transformation. Most avoidants are spoiled because partners accommodate their needs for space and independence without equivalent accommodation of partners' needs for consistency and presence. Relationships with avoidance typically involve extensive accommodation of avoidance needs, giving them space when they need it, understanding their need for independence, being patient with their withdrawal, accommodating their discomfort with intimacy. But equivalent accommodation of partners' needs for consistency, for emotional availability, for reliable presence doesn't occur. This asymmetric accommodation spoils the avoidant by teaching them that their needs are priority, while partners' needs are optional. They learn relationships are about accommodating them, without them needing to equivalently accommodate others. This creates entitlement, where they expect their needs to be centered, while viewing partners' needs as demanding or excessive. Most avoidants are spoiled because partners continue investing and trying, while they maintain their patterns unchanged, proving investment continues regardless of reciprocity. Throughout relationships with avoidance, partners typically continue high investment, emotional energy, time, effort to understand and accommodate, work to make relationship function, while avoidant maintains relatively low investment and unchanged patterns. This continued investment, despite lack of reciprocity, spoils the avoidant by teaching them they don't need to increase their investment to maintain relationship. Partners' investment continues regardless of whether they reciprocate, regardless of whether they change, regardless of whether they meet partners' needs. This teaches them they can receive consistent investment without providing consistent return, spoiling them into expecting one-sided investment as normal relationship dynamic. Most avoidants are spoiled because partners stay through repeated cycles of hope and disappointment, never establishing that there's a limit to how many cycles they'll accept. The typical pattern: avoidant creates hope through temporary improvement or through promises. Partner invests hope and effort based on this. Avoidance patterns reassert and disappoint this hope. Cycle repeats. Partners stay through multiple cycles, continuing to hope that this time will be different, that the improvement will stick, that the promises will be kept. This teaches avoidant that cycles can continue indefinitely, that there's no actual limit to how many times they can disappoint and still have partner return with hope for next cycle. They're spoiled into believing unlimited chances are available, that they never actually risk permanent loss, regardless of how many cycles of disappointment they create. Most avoidants are spoiled because the patterns that should end relationships instead become accepted characteristics that partners tolerate indefinitely. In healthy relationship dynamics, patterns like consistent withdrawal, emotional unavailability, hot-cold behavior would naturally lead to relationship ending. These patterns are incompatible with healthy, sustained intimacy. But with spoiled avoidance, these patterns don't end relationships because partners reframe them as characteristics to accommodate rather than as deal breakers to enforce consequences about. That's just how they are, becomes justification for accepting what should be unacceptable. This spoils avoidance by teaching them their dysfunctional patterns are tolerable characteristics rather than relationship-ending behaviors, removing natural consequences that would otherwise force either change or loss of relationship. They learn they can maintain patterns indefinitely because partners will reframe patterns as personality traits rather than enforcing consequences for behavior that makes healthy relationship impossible. The real reasons most avoidant relationships fail that have nothing to do with compatibility. Most avoidant relationships fail not because of incompatibility or bad timing, but because of specific dynamics created by spoiled avoidance and by partners who enable rather than challenge their patterns. Understanding the real failure mechanisms reveals what actually destroys these relationships. Most avoidant relationships fail because the avoidant never develops capacity for sustained intimacy, since partners accommodate patterns instead of requiring capacity development. The fundamental capacity for sustained intimate relationship, ability to tolerate vulnerability, ability to maintain presence during discomfort, ability to be consistently emotionally available, never develops in spoiled avoidant, because development requires either therapeutic work or pressure from relationship consequences demanding development. When partners accommodate patterns indefinitely, when they accept hot-cold behavior and withdrawal and emotional unavailability as unchangeable, they remove the pressure that would motivate capacity development. The relationship fails eventually because it's simply not possible to sustain intimate partnership with someone who lacks capacity for sustained intimacy, regardless of whether both people care about each other. The caring exists, but capacity doesn't, and caring without capacity cannot sustain relationship long-term. Most avoidant relationships fail because the power imbalance created by pursuit-distance dynamic eventually becomes intolerable for the pursuing partner. The spoiled avoidant maintains power position through distance and through being pursued, while partner is in one down position of pursuing and accommodating. This power imbalance is sustainable temporarily, but becomes increasingly intolerable over time as pursuing partner's self-respect erodes, as resentment builds, as exhaustion from one-sided effort accumulates. Eventually, most pursuing partners reach breaking point where the power imbalance becomes unbearable. They cannot continue in position of having less power, less value, less respect in the dynamic. The relationship fails because power imbalance that spoiling created is fundamentally unsustainable, regardless of whether love exists underneath the imbalanced dynamic. Most avoidant relationships fail because resentment accumulates in both partners for different reasons until it poisons whatever positive feelings existed. The pursuing partner accumulates resentment about doing all the work, about accommodating all the patterns, about their needs going unmet, about feeling devalued and disrespected. The avoidant accumulates resentment about feeling pressured, even when pressure is just partner's normal needs, about partner's neediness, about relationship feeling like obligation. This mutual resentment accumulates over time through repeated cycles of disappointment and conflict. Eventually, the resentment overwhelms the positive feelings. Partners stop seeing each other with love and start seeing each other through resentment lens. The relationship fails because resentment has poisoned the well. Even if both people remember caring about each other, they cannot access those feelings through the accumulated resentment that now defines their experience of each other. Most avoidant relationships fail because the pursuing partner eventually reaches exhaustion point where they cannot continue the one-sided effort regardless of their feelings. Pursuing an avoidant, accommodating their patterns, managing the hot-cold behavior, trying to make relationship work while receiving inadequate reciprocity is exhausting. This exhaustion accumulates over months or years until pursuing partner simply doesn't have energy to continue. They might still care, might still feel the connection, but they're too exhausted to keep pursuing, too tired to keep trying, too depleted to continue one-sided effort. The relationship fails because exhaustion makes continuation impossible, regardless of feelings. You can love someone and still be too exhausted to continue trying with them, and this exhaustion-based ending is common failure mode for avoidant relationships. Most avoidant relationships fail because the avoidance patterns eventually cross line that even spoiling partner cannot accept. Creating ending the avoidant didn't anticipate. Even partners who accommodate extensively have limits, have lines that cannot be crossed. The avoidant, spoiled by years of patterns being accepted, continues escalating patterns or becomes increasingly complacent about poor treatment because they've learned there are no consequences. Eventually, they cross line they didn't know existed. Maybe it's particular betrayal. Maybe it's specific disrespect. Maybe it's just the cumulative weight reaching breaking point. The partner who always stayed suddenly leaves and stays gone. The relationship fails because the avoidant, spoiled into believing they could continue patterns indefinitely, pushed too far and discovered too late that there were limits they crossed by assuming limits didn't exist. Most avoidant relationships fail because the partner eventually realizes they deserve better than they're receiving and chooses self-respect over the relationship. This realization typically comes through comparison. Partner observes other relationships where needs are met, where effort is reciprocal, where patterns don't dominate, or through therapy or friends' observations, helping them recognize they're accepting unacceptable treatment. This realization, I deserve better than this, is often relationship death sentence because once partner recognizes they deserve more than they're receiving, continuing to accept less becomes impossible. The relationship fails because partner's self-respect eventually exceeds their attachment, and they choose themselves over continuing in relationship where they're consistently devalued and where their needs go unmet. Most avoidant relationships fail because without consequences, forcing growth, the avoidant remains unchanged, while partner grows and eventually outgrows the dynamic. The pursuing partner, through therapy or through personal growth work or through life experience, develops stronger boundaries, clearer sense of self-worth, better understanding of healthy relationship dynamics. Meanwhile, the avoidant remains unchanged because nothing has forced their growth. Patterns continue to be accommodated so no development occurs. Eventually, partner has grown to point where accepting avoidance patterns is no longer compatible with who they've become. The relationship fails because growth, differential, creates incompatibility. Partner has evolved to person who requires healthy, reciprocal dynamic, while avoidant remains person capable only of defended limited connection. They're no longer compatible, not because they never were, but because one grew while other stayed static. Most avoidant relationships fail because the relationship becomes defined by the patterns and the struggle, rather than by love and connection, losing what made it valuable. In early stages, the relationship might have been characterized by genuine connection, by positive experiences, by feelings of love despite patterns. But over time, as patterns repeat and as accommodation becomes primary dynamic, the relationship becomes defined by managing patterns rather than by enjoying connection. Every interaction becomes about whether avoidant will withdraw, whether partner's needs will be met, whether patterns will reassert. The positive elements that made relationship valuable become overshadowed by constant navigation of patterns and struggle to make relationship function. The relationship fails because it stops being source of joy and connection and becomes full-time exhausting project of managing dysfunction. And eventually, both people recognize that relationship defined by managing patterns isn't worth maintaining, regardless of underlying feelings. What refusing to beg does for your power and for potential relationship success. The choice to refuse to beg, the avoidant to return, to maintain your dignity and your boundaries when they've disrespected you, creates specific outcomes both for your personal power and for any potential future of the relationship. Understanding what refusal to beg accomplishes reveals why maintaining boundaries serves both you and the relationship better than pursuit ever could. Refusing to beg preserves your self-respect and your power, preventing the contempt and power imbalance that begging creates. When you refuse to beg, when you maintain your dignity by not pursuing someone who's treated you poorly, you preserve your self-respect intact. You don't debase yourself, don't place yourself in inferior position, don't give them reason to view you with contempt. This preservation of self-respect maintains your power in the dynamic. You're not the weak one begging, you're the strong one who knows their worth and refuses to accept treatment below that worth. This maintained power is crucial because any potential relationship success requires relatively equal power dynamic. By refusing to beg, you prevent the power imbalance that would make healthy relationship impossible, even if they returned. You remain in position of strength that commands respect, rather than in position of weakness that invites contempt. Refusing to beg forces the avoidant to experience real consequences for their patterns instead of being spoiled by consequence-free behavior continuation. When you refuse to beg, when you maintain your absence and your boundaries, the avoidant experiences genuine consequence. They've lost you. This is real cost their patterns haven't typically faced because previous partners begged and returned, removing the consequence. This consequence is exactly what spoiled avoidants need to experience. They need to learn that their patterns cost them valuable people, that poor treatment leads to permanent loss, that they cannot treat people badly indefinitely without losing them. This consequence is potentially transformative in ways begging never could be, because consequence creates pain that might motivate genuine change, might drive them to therapy, might force recognition that patterns are destroying their chances for relationship they want. Your refusal to beg is gift to them, though they won't initially experience it this way, because it's the consequence their patterns need to face for any growth to occur. Refusing to beg communicates that you value yourself more than you value being with them, which is the only stance that commands respect from avoidant. The avoidant respects strength, respects boundaries, respects people who value themselves enough to walk away from inadequate treatment. They don't respect desperation, don't respect people who beg, don't respect those who value relationship over self-respect. When you refuse to beg, When you demonstrate through your actions that losing them is preferable to losing your self-respect, you earn their respect in ways pursuit never could. This respect is foundation for any potential healthy relationship. If they eventually do address their patterns and develop capacity, they can only build healthy relationship with someone they respect, and your refusal to beg is what establishes that respect. Begging destroys respect permanently. Refusing to beg preserves possibility of respect that any future relationship would require. Refusing to beg allows you to move forward with your life instead of staying stuck in painful limbo of hoping they'll change without evidence of change. When you refuse to beg, when you enforce your boundary by actually leaving and staying gone, you free yourself to move forward. You're not stuck in waiting pattern, not organizing your life around, hoping they'll return or change, not preventing yourself from healing or from meeting others because you're still pursuing unavailable person. This forward movement is crucial for your well-being, regardless of whether relationship with them eventually becomes possible. If they never change, you've moved forward toward better options. If they do eventually change, you've been living your life rather than waiting, which maintains your value and your options. Refusing to beg is choosing yourself and your life over being stuck in painful patterns with them. Refusing to beg creates mystery and absence that are far more powerful for triggering avoidance attachment anxiety than pursuit ever could be. The avoidance attachment system activates in response to absence and unavailability, not in response to presence and pursuit. When you beg and pursue, you trigger their withdrawal response. But when you refuse to beg, when you're completely absent and unavailable, you trigger their attachment anxiety. They face loss, they experience your unavailability, they cannot take you for granted. This activation of their attachment anxiety is what creates the possibility that they might recognize what they've lost and might be motivated to address their patterns. Your absence is more powerful than your presence for creating any potential recognition or change in them. Refusing to beg isn't game playing. It's recognizing that your absence creates conditions where recognition becomes possible, while your pursuit creates conditions where patterns continue indefinitely. Refusing to beg establishes that there are real boundaries and real consequences for poor treatment, teaching them that relationship with you requires actual behavior change, not just words. If you eventually reconsider relationship with them, only after sustained evidence of genuine change through therapy and demonstrated different behavior over time, your refusal to beg will have established crucial precedent. They cannot treat you poorly without losing you. This established boundary creates foundation where relationship could potentially be different because they've learned that maintaining relationship with you requires actual change behavior, requires consistent respect, requires developed capacity for intimacy. Without your refusal to beg, without the consequence of permanent loss, their patterns faced, any future relationship would follow same pattern because nothing would have taught them that change is actually required. Your refusal creates the only conditions under which different outcome becomes remotely possible. Refusing to beg attracts them back, if they're capable of growth, from position of strength where healthy relationship might be possible, unlike begging, which would attract them back from position of contempt where healthy relationship is impossible. If the avoidant eventually does address their patterns through therapy, develops capacity they lacked, and wants to try again, they can only build healthy relationship if they respect you and if power dynamic is balanced. Your refusal to beg is what maintains both. You've preserved their respect through your strength, and you've maintained balanced power by not placing yourself in one down begging position. If they return after having done genuine work, relationship has chance of being different because it's starting from position of mutual respect and balanced power that your refusal to beg preserved. In contrast, if you begged and they returned, Relationship would start from a position of contempt and imbalanced power that would guarantee repetition of same dysfunctional patterns. Refusing to beg ultimately teaches you a crucial lesson about self-respect and boundaries that serves you in this relationship and in all future relationships. The most important outcome of refusing to beg is what it teaches you about yourself, that you can enforce boundaries even when difficult, that you can choose self-respect over relationship when necessary, that you have strength to walk away from treatment that doesn't serve you. This learning is invaluable regardless of whether relationship with avoidant eventually becomes healthy or whether you move on to someone else. You've proven to yourself that you won't abandon yourself for someone else, that your self-respect is non-negotiable, that you can survive and thrive without relationship that requires you to beg or to debase yourself. This self-knowledge and this demonstrated capacity for self-protection through boundaries serves you in all future relationships, ensuring you won't tolerate patterns that should be intolerable, ensuring you'll maintain your worth regardless of how much you care about someone, ensuring you'll choose yourself when choosing someone else requires losing yourself. The avoidant may or may not win in the end. That depends on whether they do the work to change. But you win by refusing to beg, because you've won the battle for your own self-respect and your own dignity, and that victory is permanent, regardless of what happens with them.